So my first question, and I'm not asking you to speculate, right, but based on your knowledge of FBI policies regarding investigation closures, and also based on what you found out that the FBI knew pretty early in the process of that consensual monitoring and what they found out once they finally interviewed the primary subsource, would it have been consistent with FBI and Department of Justice guidelines to close Crossfire Hurricane shortly after the FBI first interviewed Steele's primary subsource in January 2017? And would that have been a reasonable discretionary decision?
So certainly one of our criticisms that we've laid out here is that as the team was gathering this evidence as to the Carter Page FISA in particular, they weren't reassessing it, including primarily, as I'm sure we'll talk about, the information from the primary subsource that was inconsistent with the Steele reporting. We even have in here in the report a reference on page 212 where we've got agents talking with one another about why is Page even a subject anymore. To your question of why are they still looking at him, they were actually asking that question not just as to the FISA, but the foundational question of Carter Page, we're not finding anything as to him. Why aren't we reassessing?
So again, Mike, would have been within their guidelines. Would have that been if they'd done that and you were doing investigation, you go, that was a reasonable discretionary decision to close this thing down.
Certainly, as someone who's done these cases in AUSA and working with agents, if you're getting information that isn't advancing and in fact potentially undercutting or significantly undercutting your primary theme or theory, as was happening here with the Carter Page FISA, you'd look at the Carter Page file and say, should I keep going on this Carter Page related matter?
I believe this is going to be outside, and I think I understand, I know what your answer is going to be, but I want to ask the question. Did in the course of your investigation, did you ever find out how George Papadopoulos was put in touch with Mifsud, Downer, Halper, or Turk?
That was not something within the scope of our review. If we would have seen something in FBI records about that, we would have assessed it. But we were focused, as I said in my opening.
And you saw nothing in the records that would answer those questions?
Find anything that would connect all of that from the FBI side of the information.
According to James Comey's May 28, 2019 op-ed in the Washington Post, Joseph Mifsud, unnamed at the time, was a, quote, Russian agent. Again, did you find anything in the FBI documents that would support James Comey's conclusion about that?
I want to be careful on that because I think if I answer either way, I might be touching on information I'm not sure I can speak to in this setting.
Okay.
But let me be clear, we certainly would have looked to see what the FBI.
We'll follow up in a different setting. Did you ever determine why on April 1st, 2016, FBI headquarters directed FBI's New York field office to open a counterintelligence investigation on Carter Page? Did you ever get to the bottom of why that happened?
I'm sorry.
So in April 1st, 2016, FBI headquarters directed the field office in New York to open up a counterintelligence investigation on Carter Page. Did you ever figure out what caused that?
We did. The primary purpose of this was not to look at that investigation. We did get some testimony we describe here about that investigation and what prompted them to open it. It grew out of a Southern District of New York case, but we didn't go beyond that and dig into the files.
So you never found out why FBI headquarters directed that it should not be a sensitive investigative matter?
Again, we didn't go into the specifics of how they precisely decided to open it, other than interviewing some of the witnesses to understand a little bit for background purposes.
Neither of Peter Strzok's immediate bosses, Bill Priestap or Assistant Director Steinbeck, wanted him to run the investigation, mainly because of the relationship with Lisa Page, as well as kind of a tendency to go around, particularly Steinbeck, go right to McCabe. But Andrew McCabe overruled that decision. Did you ever find out why?
So we talk about that in the report, page 64 and 65, about that very issue. And Mr. Priestap recalls it as you described. Mr. McCabe We have his explanation in there. Didn't precisely recall certain of the events, recalled some other events, and again, we lay it out. We laid out there what he was involved in terms of selecting as Mr. Priestap described it, having Mr. Strzok stay on the investigation.
On August 25th, Deputy Director McCabe directed Crossfire Hurricane to contact the New York field office for helpful information. It turned out that helpful information was the Steele reporting. Now, this is 25 days before the FBI actually received the first 6 Steele reports. Did you ever get to the bottom of how Andrew McCabe was so far ahead of the rest of the FBI in that?
Again, we asked witnesses about that, including Mr. McCabe, and we had ultimately we weren't able to get to the bottom of exactly what caused that delay or what prompted that call.
Now, McCabe told people he didn't remember doing this, but in fact, McCabe told your team he did not remember details about 26 significant events in your report. Did you find his memory lapses credible? He seemed to be pretty. He seemed to be pretty involved in this investigation. I mean, overruling to make sure Peter Strzok would be named the director, contacting the New York field office. He seemed to be pretty involved, and yet on some pretty significant issues in your report, he just doesn't recall. Do you find that those memory lapses credible?
We did find he was briefed on the investigation, and as you noted, there were several points at the beginning where he was involved. We don't make a determination or credibility finding on that issue.
Okay.